thanks for joining us for another episode of the MurderMurder News podcast. As you probably already know, these weekly episodes also serve as weekly meetings for our very own true crime cult. But not to worry, you've landed in the cult with all of the flower crowns and none of the flavor aid. If you don't know us yet because you're just finding us for the first time today, I'm Angelina and I'm hanging out with my sinister sister, Aurora. How is your week going?
It is... I don't even know what to say anymore.
Aww. You can't even muster any kind of a light positive, doing great.
I'm great. I'm doing just great.
You're great. Well, you're looking very cute, and you took some great pics for our merch, which look adorable as well. And you look fresh and happy, even if you're not feeling it. So.
Yeah, definitely. The most fun thing I did this weekend was a mini photo shoot for our newly relaunched merch store. I don't know if you all know about this, but if you go to MurderMurder.news, we have our holiday merch ready to go for all of your true crime enthusiasts. You need to get a present for this year. Some of it's MurderMurder News specific, but some of it's just
some is our merch, some is just cute, spooky stuff. We got a whole array, many, many different things. So something for everyone.
Yes. And, a lot of this is stuff that Angelina newly designed for the PNW True Crime Fest, which it just, all of that stuff sold like hotcakes. We couldn't believe how many shirts we sold. And we had talked to some of our podcast friends about past festivals they'd done. And they're like, sometimes I sold 5, sometimes I sold none, whatever. And from the moment we set things on the table, people were just grabbing up the little baby goats and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. So that's amazing. We were instantly all right, we got to make more of this stuff. And we got to put this stuff online. And luckily we managed to accomplish that in time for holiday shopping season. So it's MurderMurder.news/shop. Go find that. Go, check it out.
And it's cute because one of our good podcast friends from LA, Not So Confidential, Dr. Shiloh, bought our super cute Stop Romanticizing Serial Killer shirt, which I'm wearing right now.
And, look at that.
Yes. And she bought it and she posted it in her Instagram and immediately said she got 50 requests asking where she had gotten it from. And at the time, we just hadn't gotten our storefront up and running. So we finally got that. We're using Dr. Shiloh's picture as our model. And she's just the cutest little model on the planet. So go check out Dr. Shiloh and go get a shirt for yourself or somebody that loves true crime in your life.
Yeah, do it.
Of course, we consider our listeners to be honorary monsters, but if you'd like to make it official, you can join the Monster Commune on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/MurderMurderNews and show your support for all we do by making a monthly pledge of whatever amount you like. Whether you've got a few extra bucks or a few hundred, and to show how much we appreciate that support, we'll give you a cool title like Grandmaster of Goats, a shout out on the show, and we'll send you your very own adorable baby goats. Plus, you'll have exclusive access to our regular patron-only content.
Now, let's kick things off with a look at some of the true crime stories that have been making headlines this week.
We need your help identifying the killer of 13-year-old Jays Agnew. Jays was raking leaves in his family yard in Hillcrest Heights, Maryland, last Tuesday when he was gunned down. His father had been in the yard with him and went into the house for just a few minutes when Jays was shot. He died in the hospital from his injuries on Friday. There have been no arrest in Jay's murder, and his mother, Juanita, feels unsafe in her own home, not knowing what the motive may have been for shooting her young son. She described Jays as goofy, fun-loving, calm, and relaxed. She's begging anyone who has any details about his murder to please come forward.
4 students from University of Idaho were found dead inside a home near campus on Sunday. Police received a call around noon on Sunday about an unconscious person in the home. Inside the house on King Road, they found the bodies of 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, 21-year-old Madison Mogen, 20-year-old Zaina Kernodle, and 21-year-old Kaylee Goncaves. The cause of death has not yet been released, but is being treated as a homicide. It's unknown if they knew their attacker, and there have been no arrests made. Investigators have said there is no threat to the community.
find that a little hard to believe.
Yeah, right?
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break from one of our fellow Darkcast podcasts.
As I count backwards from 3, allow this message to enter your mind without judgment or question. 3.
Forget your worries.
2.
Your mind is now more receptive.
1.
You are now perfectly relaxed
And susceptible to suggestion.
You enjoy listening to the Mom I Joined a Cult podcast.
You find the more you listen, the more relaxed you are in awkward situations.
You will now be returned to your regularly scheduled program
With a renewed sense of energy and determination.
to subscribe to the Mom I Joined a Cult podcast.
In 3,
Obey my goat.
2,
Garlic bread is the best bread.
1.
And we're back.
Before we dig in, we want to offer a quick disclaimer. Though we joke about forming a true crime cult, that is not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, and we want you to know that we take the cases we're discussing very seriously.
We want to deliver each story with the utmost respect to victims and anyone involved. If you feel we've missed the mark, you don't like our tone, or if you notice we've gotten any details wrong, let us know with a quick email to murdermurdernews@gmail.com and we'll make it right.
Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include infant murder, child murder, genital mutilation, and graphic descriptions of violence. So if any of those subjects are particularly sensitive for you, feel free to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
35 years ago today, the small community of Ina, Illinois was shaken when members of a young family were found brutally murdered. In a town so small everyone knew everyone, was it possible a killer was hiding among them? The Dardeen family had only just bought their home a year earlier, but when 30-year-old Elaine Dardeen found out she was pregnant with the couple's second child, her husband Keith worried that the town of Ina, with a long history of violence, was not the ideal place to raise a family. Unfortunately for the Dardeens, they didn't get out in time. Our sources for today include the Chicago Tribune, AP News, Medium, missingillinois.org, KMOV, and more. For a full list of our sources, check out our show notes.
The Dardeens moved to Ina, Illinois in 1986, but after hearing about a recent rise in crimes in the area, the couple listed their mobile home for sale. We all know a story about a safe, small town suddenly feeling under siege after a murder or kidnapping terrorizes the locals. Well, Ina was a little bit of the opposite. Though small, Ina actually always had a checkered past. Long before colonizers took land away from indigenous people living in southern Illinois, the Shawnee tribe lived in what is now known as Ina. During the Trail of Tears that took place between 1830 and 1850, around 60,000 Native Americans from Cherokee, Muskogee, Seminole, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Ponca, and Ho-Chunk/Winnebago nations were forced out of their homes in the southeast U.S. and made to head west towards Oklahoma. It was a treacherous trek by foot of over 1,000 miles, and many were chained, and food and provisions were not provided by the government. It's estimated that over 4,000 indigenous people forced to relocate died of starvation, illness, or exhaustion. Many refugees settled in and around Ina, and according to Wikipedia, the area jokingly became known as a Cherokee reservation. We're not sure we get the joke. Is that because there are currently no federal reservations in Illinois due to tribes being tricked, coerced, and forced to give up land in a series of treaties?
The area was prosperous for the colonizers in the area until 1905, when a new railroad hub rerouted traffic away from the area. In 1924, a murder rocked Ina as Reverend Lawrence Height and his lover, Elsie Sweeten, poisoned Elsie's husband and Lawrence's wife. The two used arsenic to poison their spouses. The village of Ina made the news when the two lovers went to trial. In 1985, 18-year-old Tom Odell murdered his parents and 3 siblings while high on LSD. This may not sound like a lot of crime for the area, but the village of Ina only had a population of 460 people in 1980.
Wow.
By 1990, they'd only increased the population by 29, bringing that number up to 489. Just a year after family annihilator Tom Odell killed his family, the Dardeen family moved to Ina. Russell Keith Dardeen was born on June 22, 1958, in nearby Mount Carmel, Illinois. He went by his middle name, Keith. Keith went to school at Wabash Valley College and graduated with an associate degree of conservation and outdoor recreation in 1979. While at university, he met his future wife, Ruby Elaine Dardeen. Elaine also went by her middle name, so the two had something in common right from the get-go.
Elaine was born on August 10, 1957, in Fairfield, Illinois. She attended Wabash Valley College for Secretarial Sciences and graduated in 1978. The two were married at a church in Albion on July 28, 1979. They had their son Peter on July 5, 1984. 28-year-old Keith and 29-year-old Elaine moved to Ina in 1986 with their son Peter, who was 2 years old at the time. Keith worked as a treatment plant operator for the Rend Lake Water Conservancy District. He was known for his good work ethic and always being on time. Elaine got a job as a secretary at Devonport Office Supply in nearby Mount Vernon. The two were very involved in their church, the Pentecostal Assembly of God, where they both joined in a musical ensemble. Elaine played the piano and Keith sang.
Money was tight for the young family. They purchased a small beige and white mobile home, and the two were determined to make a good life for their son, Peter. Keith would save cans from sodas at work to trade them in for cash. He planned to use the extra money from the cans for Peter's future college fund. We already mentioned that Ina and surrounding areas were not super safe. In 1986, a 10-year-old girl was raped in a town nearby. Keith was aware of the rising crime rates and was concerned for his family. He would often talk to his mom, Joanne, about horrific cases in the news. Joanne has said, quote, "It was odd. We'd usually end up talking about murders. I know you might think that's crazy, but me and him were just really into talking about a lot of murder cases, and things happening to people." Joanne, we don't think that's weird at all. Very relatable.
Mm-hmm. By 1987, Keith was talking to his mom about a plan to head back to Mount Carmel. Elaine had found out she was pregnant, and the two were so excited to welcome a new baby into their family. They were going to name the baby either Casey or Ian. Keith wanted to head home to a place that felt safer than Ina. Joanne was concerned about him finding a job in his hometown, but Keith said he didn't care and would find a way. His plan was to move back home by January of 1988. Reading all those true crime headlines had just gotten to him, and he didn't feel safe. They put their mobile home up for sale. In the meantime, they just focused on staying safe during their remaining time in their mobile home. They always locked their doors day or night, and they were very cautious about answering if a stranger stopped by. It's incredible to think that we used to open our doors to strangers in the 80s at all. Once, a young woman came to their home in a crisis. She needed help and asked to use their phone. Keith answered the door and didn't trust her story. He thought it could be a ruse, and perhaps she would come inside to either case their place or have accomplices waiting nearby to come and rob them. He felt bad for not helping the young woman, but protecting his young family felt more important.
The weekend of November 14th, 1987, the young family spent the weekend with Keith's mom, Joanne. They talked about the baby coming and how excited they were for little Casey to be born. Like usual, Keith and Joanne talked true crime and about the fact that there had been 15 homicides in Jefferson County in the last 2 years. They spoke about Keith and Elaine making the move to Mount Carmel, 80 miles away, and about the mobile home being on the market. Joanne got the feeling Keith was worried about something. She pried a little bit, hoping to soothe her son, and he just said, "Just too many things happening down there." That Wednesday, November 18th, 1987, Keith no-showed to his job at the water treatment plant. This wasn't like him. He had always been reliable, and his boss worried something was wrong. His boss tried calling the Dardeen home, expecting Keith or Elaine to answer. Elaine was now in the 7th month of her pregnancy and was taking some time off work. She should have been home with 3-year-old Peter. There was no answer. Next, his boss tried calling Keith's mom, Joanne, and his dad, Don. His parents lived separately, but both were concerned about the well-being of their son. They, too, tried calling the mobile home, but there was still no answer.
His parents called the police and requested a welfare check. Around 6:30 p.m., Don met officers at the Dardeens' home with a key to get inside. Together, they peeked into the windows with everything looking quiet inside. The Dardeens' red 1981 Plymouth wasn't parked at the house, so was it possible Elaine had a complication with the pregnancy and they had to go to the hospital? Then they noticed it appeared someone was in the couple's waterbed in their room. They knocked to try to rouse whoever was sleeping. There was no movement. The key had been unnecessary because all of the doors to the home were unlocked. An officer entered through the back door.
They could see Elaine was tucked in bed under a blanket but wasn't waking up. Under the blanket was a gruesome scene. We want to give an extra content warning here because what we're about to describe is particularly upsetting. If child and infant death are triggers for you, we suggest fast forwarding a minute or two or sitting this one out. It's pretty awful. Both 30-year-old Elaine and 3-year-old Peter had been bound and gagged with duct tape. It appeared Elaine had been restrained on a chair at some point. Both had been hit twice in the head with a baseball bat Peter had received as a gift for his birthday. Elaine and Peter both had fractured skulls and died of blunt force trauma. To make matters worse, Elaine must have gone into labor during or after the attack. She was in her 3rd trimester of her pregnancy, and the trauma and the stress of the attack had caused her to go into labor early. Baby Casey had been born months early at just under 4 pounds. She had been hit once with a baseball bat to the head and also died of blunt force trauma. The force of the blows from the bat had been powerful, and we mention this because it sounds to me like maybe 2 hits in the head or 1 hit in the head might not be enough to kill someone, but they were hit so hard that that is in fact what had killed them. It's believed that whoever bludgeoned the 3 to death must have been strong. There were no signs of sexual assault. Keith was nowhere to be found, and the car was missing too. It was clear to officers this had been an intimate crime. Elaine and the 2 little ones had been tucked into their bed after their murder, a sign their killer had wanted to hide what they had done.
The doors to the trailer had been unlocked. There was no sign of forced entry. There were valuables and cash sitting in plain sight, and none of it had been taken. This couldn't have been a robbery. An all-out search began for Keith and his car. Officials called his parents, his sister, and the best man in his wedding, Kevin Davis, was contacted in Colorado to see if he was hiding Keith. Kevin was in disbelief about the murders of Elaine and the 2 kids. He told officers that Keith and Elaine were the nicest couple you'd ever want to meet. He told officers there was no way Keith could have done this. He said there was no way, and it wasn't even a possibility. In the meantime, detectives started looking for a motive. Had there been an affair in their marriage? Were they having financial difficulties? After all, there had been another family annihilator in town just 2 years earlier, almost to the day. The next day, around 1:30 a.m., the red 1981 Plymouth was spotted 11 miles away from the Dardeen family home in front of the Benton Police Department. Keith was still nowhere to be found. Officials searched the car. There was blood inside. Was this transfer from the brutal slaying of Keith's family, or had he been injured too?
The same day, hunters were in a wheat field near Wren Lake College, about a mile from the Dardeen home. It was there that they found the body of Keith Dardeen, unrecognizable. He had been shot in the head 3 times, once through the front of his skull, once to the right side of his face, and once through his left cheek. His genitals had been severed, and it's believed that the blood found in the family's car had been from Keith's injuries. There was blood splatter inside of the car, so it's possible he had been killed there. It appeared the family had all been murdered within 1 hour of each other. They had last been seen alive around 5 p.m. on November 17th. It's believed they had dinner together, and sometime around an hour and a half after they ate, the assailant attacked them. Elaine, Peter, and Casey had died about 12 hours before they were found on November 18th. Keith had been dead around 24 to 36 hours before he was found the following day. The order of the massacre of the Dardeen family is a little unclear. Police believe that their killer had entered the Dardeen trailer and bound Elaine and Peter, possibly to a chair. Keith was then escorted to the car with the assailant and at some point had his penis removed and was shot 3 times.
Investigators were unclear as to whether Keith had been shot at home or elsewhere. Then they think the killer returned to their home and beat Elaine, Peter, and Casey to death. It's believed that this was the order of the killings because the killer took time to tidy up the Dardeens' home. He made an attempt to clean up the blood. Toxicology was run on each of the victims, and no drugs or alcohol were found in their systems. A trace of marijuana was found in the trailer. There was no other evidence that Keith or Elaine had been selling or using drugs, so there was speculation that the killer had dropped the small amount of marijuana at the house during the attack. The case made headlines, with 30 officers assigned to the case and 100 people interviewed. At one point, a person of interest was taken into custody, but they were quickly released. As far as we can tell, their identity has never been made public.
There didn't appear to be a clear motive for the merciless slayings, yet the crime really did feel so personal. Keith having his genitals severed, Elaine and the little ones tucked into bed under the blankets. There was no doubt the Dardeens were not wealthy and were focused on saving money, but they also didn't appear to have any debt or owe anyone money. There were no signs that either one of them were having an affair. Yet it appeared the attack had been orchestrated by someone they knew. There were no signs of forced entry and nothing appeared to be missing. There were no signs of a struggle. We know Keith was not one to let strangers into their home, so if the perpetrator had gotten inside without forcing their way in, was this someone the Dardeens trusted? This was a mystery. The community was in a frenzy. Had this been a random attack? Police believed it had been personal and was not at all random, but the Dardeens had no known enemies, which made the whole community feel unsafe. Neighbors bought guns and started locking their doors in a time when that was less common.
Rumors immediately circulated about cults and Satanists being involved. One woman interviewed by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch said she had heard of cattle being slaughtered in fields and the culprits taking only their blood. The brutal nature of the attack, including the murder of the baby and Keith's severed penis, perpetuated the idea that this had been some sort of cult ritual. Police doubted this angle from the beginning, stating that if this had been the case, they would have removed organs, written on walls, and burned candles. Come Christmas of 1987, investigators had a plethora of leads, but nothing concrete. Keith's family pleaded with the public to come forward with suspects. They offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest, or a $20,000 reward for information leading to an arrest before Christmas. An arrest never came, and no suspects were ever announced.
Joanne, Keith's mom, was determined to get this case solved, and she even collected 3,000 signatures to have the murder covered on the Oprah Winfrey Show. However, the show's producers believed it was too graphic for daytime TV. She tried to get the attention of America's Most Wanted, but they too believed it was just too gruesome for their show as well. Finally, in 1998, they agreed to do a segment on the Dardeen family murders, but the show did not help dredge up any new leads. 2 serial killers have been tied to the case throughout the years. The first was Angel Resendez, known as the Railroad Killer. Angel would ride trains from Mexico, the US, and Canada, jumping off the train periodically to break into homes. Once inside, he would kill the occupants using a gun, picksack, rocks, or items found inside the house. He would rape the female victims. He would often target couples. After murdering the occupants, he would cover them with a blanket and then hang out around the house for a bit. He would eat, look through their jewelry, and ultimately take a trophy or two. Angel killed between 15 to 23 people between 1986 to 1999.
As you may recall, Ina used to be a railroad hub with train stations nearby, so some have speculated Angel could have been involved. This case does resemble Angel's MO, and he did kill 2 victims in Illinois in 1999. But it appeared nothing had been taken from the Dardeen home, and Angel liked to go through a victim's belongings to find things of value. Then, in 2000, another serial killer confessed to the murders of Keith, Elaine, Peter, and Casey. 36-year-old Tommy Lynn Sells had just been arrested for the 1999 murder of 13-year-old Elaine Cady Harris and the attempted murder of 10-year-old Crystal Sorrells in Del Rio, Texas. Crystal and her sister stayed over at Cady's house on December 31st for New Year's Eve. That night, Tommy broke into the Harris house and raped Cady. He stabbed her 16 times and slashed her throat. He then slashed Crystal's throat and left them both for dead. Crystal pretended to be dead until Tommy left. Then she managed to run a quarter of a mile to a neighbor's house to get help. From her hospital bed, she was able to help police with a sketch of Tommy that ultimately led to his capture.
While awaiting trial for the attack on the 2 girls, Tommy confessed to murdering the Dardeen family. Like Angel, Tommy had been traveling around by train, breaking into homes and taking victims along the way. He said he had been living in nearby St. Louis at the time, traveling around as a day laborer and carnival worker. Tommy's story was inconsistent, but in one version, he said he had met Keith either at a truck stop or pool hall. The 2 got along so well, Keith invited him over for dinner. After dinner, Keith propositioned him for a threesome with Elaine, which set Tommy off, and he killed the family as a result. He forced Keith at gunpoint to drive to the wheat field. He went back to the house and killed Elaine, who was a witness, and Peter and Casey because he couldn't stop his rage. This story never made sense to Joanne or others close to the case, because Keith was not the type of person to let a stranger in his home, and certainly not to invite someone to have sex with his pregnant wife. He did seem to know quite a few details about the family's murder, but by the year 2000, those details had been released to the press. If he did live near Ina during that time, it's possible he would have been drawn to reading about the gruesome case.
Still, Tommy gave a third version of the story. He said he had been traveling by train through Ina near the Dardeen home. He saw the for sale sign in their yard and used this as a chance to drop in on the family. He drank some beers nearby and waited for Keith to come home from work. He knocked on the door, showing an interest in buying the mobile home, and Keith let him in for a showing. Once inside, he held Keith at gunpoint and forced him to bind and gag Elaine and Peter. He forced him to drive to the nearby field where he cut off his penis. He told him he would bring it back to his wife. He shot him there in the field. He went back to the trailer and raped Elaine, then killed the rest of the family. This explanation seems more plausible, but given his prior confessions, most have doubts. One officer in an interview did believe Tommy's explanation and said at one point he described a watermelon ceramic inside of the trailer. There was a ceramic matching that description in their home. It's possible he had seen this in a crime scene photo, but it's unclear if those had been released and if a similar ceramic had been visible.
Even with his confession, there was no physical evidence tying him to the scene, and he was never charged in the crimes. Joanne does not believe Tommy had anything to do with her family's murder. She had her doubts at first, but after hearing Tommy had incorrectly identified how Elaine's body had been placed in the bed, she knew it hadn't been him. She also knew her son wouldn't have invited a stranger into his home. Joanne, who is now 84, has never given up and never stopped searching for answers. From day one, she befriended the officers on her son's case and called them nearly daily for updates. Joanne has said, quote, "I carried Keith for 9 months. I raised him. I worshiped the ground he walked on. He was a good man and a good father, and I will never give up." She has a few theories as to what may have happened to her son and his family. She believed that somebody wanted Keith to sell drugs and he refused, or Elaine turned down somebody's advances, causing them to lash out. Quote, I believe somebody wanted him to do something, and I believe that he flat out refused. And well, you do it our way or no way, Joanne said. She believes their killer is still out there on the streets and that something can still be done to find them.
That is just one of the most vicious murders I've heard described also. Like, just thinking about somebody being that violent with a brand new baby that was born that moment, as well as, you know, a small toddler. And yeah, it does, like, from what we know, you know, like, sound kind of personal, because usually people are only this vicious when they have something against the person. But I don't know. Like, I'm kind of convinced it could be a random killer as well, because how could they even have, like, I don't see how somebody being turned down by Elaine, or somebody like wanting Keith to sell drugs, would make them be that vicious. So
yeah,
I don't know.
And,
that doesn't add up
like,
for me.
I know that drug like stuff, especially in the 80s and before legalization and decriminalizing of things, could, you know, be quite deadly. But I feel like there would have been more signs around the house than like a tiny little bit of marijuana. And, you know, like, we don't know, maybe, you know, there's a chance that could have been theirs and it was for personal use. And obviously there's no judgment about that here. But it is so brutal. And like, the thing that just really gets me in content warning about childbirth and stuff, again, sorry guys to keep bringing this up, but fast forward if this is sensitive, but how does that happen? Because childbirth is something that generally like takes hours, and perhaps like given the trauma, it happened at a much faster rate. I don't know much about how that works, but like, how terrible, like just how terrible to, like, let's say in one scenario where she was bound to the chair, and it sounds like she wasn't hit until after the killer came back from shooting Keith. So like, if she did go into labor while she was like stressed about her husband being kidnapped while bound to a chair, and like the pain and just like horrific nature of that,
while being attacked, or like, it's hard to imagine how, like, when exactly this.
Yeah, I did read from one report, and I'm not sure it was in a news article, so I'm assuming it was somewhat reputable. I can't remember who was quoted as saying this, but they said that you can go into labor like after being murdered. It just has to take place within like the 15 minutes after you've been killed. So it's possible that the baby. So
even that, like,
yeah,
that like she was murdered, and then the baby was born, and then the baby was murdered, but like, it just sounds so brutal. I just can't imagine someone wanting to do that. Like, I can't imagine any grudge that would like make you attack someone's children like that, their
like
babies,
a 3-year-old and a baby, like, oh gosh,
it almost like has to be some sort of random psychopath. Like, I don't know, knowing the history of the town, like when you gave that statistic at one point where it was like something like 20 some murders in the last 2 years or something, and then you said that the population only went up by 23 in the span of like 4 years or something like that. So it's like literally more people were murdered than born. Like, that's mind-blowing. What is this place?
Yeah, because the family annihilator had killed people in the 80s, and then this family had died in the 80s as well. So that's, this is 4, and I think it was like 5. So I think it was like 9 people killed during that span in a town that only grew by 20 in 10 years.
Yeah, so that's, really a strange statistic to consider.
Yeah, and I kind of like agree. I feel like, you know, like being killed by a serial killer is so rare that I understand why the police are so quick to discount that. Like, the chances of it happening are rare, but it does happen. And this is such a gruesome attack. You're right. Like, I guess like whoever did this is clearly awful. Like, I can't imagine being able to kill like a man and a woman, period. But then to kill like 2 children, like, it just takes like a particularly, you know, like heartless person to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even necessarily be so quick to dismiss the satanic thing, as much as I know that like most of the satanic panic at that moment was like a whole bunch of fluff for nothing and just ridiculousness. It's like the way that the cops specifically were like, oh, there would be writing on the walls. Like,
yeah, I included that quote from a newspaper because I thought that was kind of silly. Like the cults can vary greatly in activity.
Of course. They might have their own new set of beliefs you never heard of. Like, it could be anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly worth investigating because like, yeah, you're right. And also like severing his genitals too.
Yeah.
It's, I just don't see this as being like a regular person with a grudge.
Yeah, no, that doesn't add up to me. I don't see that anyone, and especially I don't see that they would be involved on any level with a person that would respond to a grudge in that way. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah, very brutal.
So what are you watching this week?
Well, I went on a tour of some of the best horror comedy that I've ever seen.
Great.
I mean, I've seen some pretty great ones throughout the years.
I love it. I feel like you found your niche because, like, I know there was a time when you weren't super into horror or weren't ready to, like, embrace it and watch it alone and be scared. But, like, now you've really found your niche of horror where you
living
can
in
just,
secured buildings has really changed that for me. Like, not having, like, a ground floor window. Like, and if I'm ever living in a place with a ground floor window, again, I will go back to only watching Lifetime original movies because it's just too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so my husband's getting ready to maybe work on a horror comedy, which I might actually be able to talk more about on the show. They might like that it's being hyped up because he'll be working directly with the director. But at this point in time, we'll just say it's like a horror comedy that'll be shooting sometime this spring.
Cool.
And so he's been researching visual effect shots and stuff for like some like lower budget. And I don't mean like low budget. I just mean like not $100 million like budget kind of thing. So more in like the $5 to $20 million range. So he's looking at more of like a medium level budget for these kinds of movies. And so he was like watching all of these shows without me. And then he's like telling me about this one called Freaky. And I don't know if you all have ever seen it. Did you watch it, Angelina?
So unfortunately, I started it, but I didn't get even, I don't think halfway through. I knew this was going to happen because Louis kept putting it off and being like, I'm going to do this first. I'm going to do that first. And I was like, we're going to start this movie and you're going to want to sleep. And that is what happened. So we will resume it later. But so far, so
I'll
good.
give a little synopsis in case anybody has not seen it and is curious. It stars Vince Vaughn, and it's about a Freaky Friday situation where a high school girl jumps bodies with not just a serial killer. It's not like that kind of movie, with a like slasher Michael Myers kind of like serial killer. And they switch bodies. And so now Vince Vaughn is the high school girl and she is a serial killer. And it is so like funny and cute and charming. And my husband is like telling me about this, and he also like explained it a little bit the wrong way, which I think like there could be an opportunity for a spinoff with this alternate version he told me about. But like he's telling me about it, and I'm like, that is my perfect movie. It's like Freaky Friday and serial killer themes. Like, why would you watch this without me? So we rewatched that, and I just loved it. And then in the meantime, he wasn't sure if he wanted to rewatch it, so I downloaded some others, including Villains, which stars Bill Skarsgård from It and Barbarian. And it's great because it's another chance for Bill to kind of be like the guy you're rooting for. I find him to be quite charming in movies when he's not the it clown.
It's weird because I think it's 2 or 3 brothers maybe that are like all actors, and the
hot vampire
they all
guy.
have sort of a different they all have like a different sort of typecast. Oh yeah? Oh, yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
But like, this one, he really plays a villain well, but it's, surprising and still well done when he's like a sweet guy in the end.
Yeah. I just find him to be very likable. I want to see more things with him. Like I find him to be very charming, and you know how weird I am about American accents, but his is phenomenal for actually being Swedish and being born in Sweden. Like he must have just spent a ton of time in the US because you cannot detect like anything about it being slightly like
Yeah,
certain
I'm
words or
pretty sure I've
anything.
seen him like on interviews and stuff, and even he speaks with like an American accent.
Okay.
I think so.
That must be
He's
it.
like maybe one of those folks that phased it out,
Right.
which like is always interesting to see. I'm not sure what I would do if I were like a young person moving to a different country with a whole different accent, like whether I'd be like, let's try and like assimilate, or let's.
Yeah, it's funny because like I say this and I don't want anybody to think I'm like, oh, I can't listen to accents. I am fine. Like if he spoke in a Swedish accent, that would be fine. I just like, I find it rubs me the wrong way.
You mean
when
purposeful accents.
When they try to do an American accent, it just sounds a little bit off. Like I keep thinking like,
which
wait,
I think is
what was
fair
that?
to criticize. Those are
I'm probably
actors.
being the worst.
This is part of
I'm
their
probably the
training.
worst.
No, I
probably
think it's
get
fair
over
to criticize. I think it's fair because I think like actors, like if you're going to take a role where you got to do an accent, I mean, I think there's a lot of background in, trying out accents and that being part of your thing, especially if you want to be in a lot of American movies and you're not American. But like, I think it's fair to expect them to sound believable. So
Yeah.
I do the same thing with French accents because, and it's especially weird when you have Quebecois characters in a movie and then they'll have an accent that sounds like they're from France or something.
Right.
Or
I remember
worse.
one
Like,
Fanny talking about the Serpent movie, and the girlfriend is supposed to be Quebecois, and like she's like her French accent is not. Like that was not good.
No. Yeah, exactly.
So Villains is really good if you all want to check that out. It's also the girl from It Follows is in it, and she's really good.
She's really shaping up to be quite the like scream queen, I guess, It's like she's in a few solid horror movies lately, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I thought she was great. And also Kira Sedgwick is in it. From like The Closer. She's like in tons of things throughout the years. But it's like this really like bizarre, the tone's really like engaging home invasion kind of movie, but reversed. Reverse home invasion. It's really clever. I've never seen anything quite like it.
A reverse home invasion is called Going Out.
Yeah, but like what if you break into someone's house and they're the bad ones?
Yeah, that is an interesting spin for sure.
Yeah, it's very good. And I highly recommend that one. I feel like I watched one other one. And then I watched like kind of like an older one. Gosh, I can't think of what it's called, with Ryan Reynolds.
Is it Voices?
Voices.
Yeah, so good.
And that one I just thought was okay. It was not quite my.
I liked it. It was a little extra creepy for what I thought it would be for
very
that.
creepy.
It's a horror comedy, but it's like way more disturbing than like
it's very
the
disturbing.
average horror comedy.
Yeah, and that's it. It kind of gave me the icks. And
yeah,
so like
it's gross and scary. Yeah.
It's like I like the idea of it, and I did like it, but it like rated a little lower than the other two for me. Like those were just like funny.
I just love the fluffy parts were so funny. Like the different perspectives. They're so funny. So that is cute.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So that's all I watched. How about you?
I haven't watched any crimey stuff. I haven't watched any movies even, which is surprising. But I did start watching the new series by Guillermo del Toro, The Cabinet of Curiosities.
How's that?
Pretty good. I watched the first 2 episodes, and they're good. I like it. It's an interesting, like, low simmery sort of vibe. But I hear, it's different directors for every sort of episode. Each one is kind of like a little short film. And I hear there's some interesting directors to come. I've heard lots of like rave reviews of this from like clients and stuff. So I'm excited to finish it. But I'd recommend checking. Like the first couple are great. So.
Okay. I will definitely check that out.
Especially like the first one starts with a scary story about a storage space and like a storage auction, which I love.
Oh, yes. That sounds great.
Yeah. We also want to give a heads up to all of our listeners that we're circulating a little survey right now just to make sure that we stay on track and keep making the show that you want to hear, and just to get some feedback. We really value your feedback. So if you have given us your email for any reason, then keep an eye out for that. That should be showing up in your inbox sometime soon. We're also going to post it on our site and on our social media. So you can keep an eye out for that. We'll also just stick a link to the survey in the episode description for today's episode. So check out those show notes and get that link and fill out that survey if you want to do us a huge favor. We really appreciate it.
We want to hear your opinion.
Yeah, we need it.
Maybe you're like, could you please just stop talking and deliver the true crime case? Or maybe
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
fine too.
we don't like your voices. Could you please change them? Aurora, I don't like your American accent.
Yeah, like work on your pronunciation. Like, what are you doing?
Pronunciation's awful.
Or like, I hate dogs and cats. And what am I
Oh
even
my
doing
God.
here? Watching your, I don't know. But like, whatever it is,
I hope that's not
as
the case.
absurd or
I
whatever,
get
we want to
people
hear.
have allergies though.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I don't even get it. I'm like, I'd persevere. All right, well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week. If you need even more murder, you can get your fill on MurderMurder.news, where we post the latest breaking true crime news articles every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at MurderMurderNews, on Twitter at MurderNews, on TikTok at MurderMurderNews, and on Facebook, you can just search for MurderMurder News and you'll see our page pop up.
And while you're on Facebook searching for MurderMurder News, you'll also see our group pop up. So you'll want to join us there to chat about all things true crime, but also to stay in the loop about our upcoming events and our virtual book club selection. So right now we're reading the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, and we'll meet on Zoom to discuss the book on Sunday, November 27th. Come have a cocktail or mocktail with me for my birthday.
Happy birthday. So soon.
Yeah, it's scary.
If you love our show, let us know by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Reviews really help keep us afloat. They help new fans find our show, and they let us know which content you've been loving the most so we can keep creating more of what you like.
Thanks for listening.
Bye, spooky friends.
Bye.